Sweet. So welcome to Fitness with Familiar Faces, brought to you by the Parks Board. If you haven't filled or seen a ParkU Plus form before or in the last year, just look at that. I sent you a link through the email. It's just something you got to look at once a year. If you answer yes to any of those questions that you haven't done before, just check with the doctor. Otherwise, you're good to go. So we're going to get you started off with just a marching pattern. So the idea with these classes or these type of routines is that this could be a warm-up for you before you go for your walk or your bicycle ride or your house chore. Or if you find you're not moving as much, then this could be your workout for the day too. So it could go either ways, either as a warm-up or if this is what you do most of the day, that's fine too. So 3 sets, we start off level 1, level 2, level 3. The first one we start off with is just your marching. We do each exercise about 15 to 20 seconds. Yeah. From there, you see you can add a tapping to behind. So tapping and pulling. So if you're doing these exercises standing, same version that I do, tapping and pulling, putting your foot behind you. Or if you're seated today, then you could just go with the same marching from a chair and adding those arm or shoulder movements. But pulling exercises are good for posture, especially people that walk a lot outside, seated. Some people are still working. So pulling exercises can help with a neutral posture. Every time we tap behind, that trains your back of the hips, back of the thighs. And that's also important to train muscles you don't usually use if you are cycling or walking. From there, you're going to try going into a wider stance. So your feet wide, wide march. And from there, once you're wide, you're going to reach across and across, reaching and reaching. So if you wanna pull the stomach muscles in a little bit while you reach across. That way you train some obliques or rib muscles. And the tapping out to the side is good for your glute or hip muscles. Useful if you are have any stiffness in the hips or in the low back. And if you are seated today, you want to still stick with your marching from the chair, reaching across the body. Yeah. And then we repeat for a second set, going into just your march. So different variations of the march. Level 1 is just having those arms side to side. Level 2 today is going to be a little bit of some shadow boxing. So imagine that you have your hands right where your chin is, and you want to have a 3 count where you punch, punch, and hook. You would punch, punch, and hook. Punch, punch, and hook. And we repeat that sequence for 15-20 seconds. Or you can stick with level 1 where you just march. And then last one. Perfect. From there, you go back into those tapping, back. So for the cardio, so anything that brings that heart rate up, moving arms and legs together is the fastest way of doing it. Tapping behind you, level 1. Today's level 2 is what we call a grapevine. So it's taking a step forward and back. That's a level 2 today. Adding some more coordination where one foot goes behind and you tap. If balance is off for you today, then you could stick with level 1. Yeah. And then last one. You try going feet wide, so a wide stance. This is a stretch for your inner thighs and works your outside of the hips. Those arms, seeing if you can reach across and across. Those stomach muscles pulled in. This is for your front and middle shoulders, reaching across the body. Marching, walking, cycling, swimming. Some people have pools. All forms of cardio. Perfect. From there, you go back into your marching position. So this is where we take our water break. I ask any questions. If you don't have any questions or don't need water, you can stick with this marching position. But we're going to give each other here about 30, 40 seconds. Sweet. So level 1, we were going with the march. Level 2, seeing if you could go high march or high knee. That's another variation. Or what we did earlier was with your punching. This time switching arms and hook, jab, jab, and hook. You bring it back to around the face. Jab, jab, hook. Jab, jab, hook. And you do it at your own pace. Yeah. Then we went on to level 2. So those ones would be just those pulling, tapping behind and across. That's option 1. If balance is a little bit off, you can always have a chair there for support. Or a harder variation would be going into those grapevines. Takes a little bit more coordination, challenges balance a little bit more, where that one leg goes behind and then in front. Yeah. And then we switch over to that wide stance. So a wide stance position. And from there, reaching across and across. Wide stance exercises are good to do. If you are usually sitting in the day, walking is part of your routine, then we do want to train the outside of the hips, muscles that aren't usually used too much with those exercises. And you can do a lot of exercises in your wide stance. Pushing, pulling. And then we're going to show you 3 new exercises here. Perfect. From there, those feet go planted. You're going to see if you can take a step forward and a step back. So going back and forth with the stepping. And if you are seated today, you want to see if you can keep with your marching. Still is for bringing that heart rate up. Taking that step forward and back. That's the first variation. Yeah. Perfect. From there, those feet come back, and this time you're going to try going into your side to side, back and forth. So 3 new exercises, level 1 to start, and then we add a little bit more difficulty. Side to side is good for changing directions, feeling that a little bit more on the outside of the hip, and can be useful for people with lower back stiffness to move those hips more to the side and behind. Yeah. And finally, we go into a bend today, wide stance again. So we're going to go in that wide position, hands come on the hips, and seeing if you can just bend back and forward. So from a side view, back, and forth. Keeping those legs straight is level 1. Feeling that stretch in the hamstrings. So sometimes people say they have tightness in the back of the thighs or tightness in the hamstrings. That would be level 1, a bend. Feeling that in your inner thighs and your hamstrings. Yeah. Perfect. And then we repeat that sequence. So from there, you're going back into that marching. You can always come back to here if you find you need a break or if something doesn't feel right, you can go back to the marching. But we're going to repeat these for a second set and then we take our break. So level 1 is stepping that forward and back position. If you have any knee injuries, stay going back and forth. If you don't have any knee injuries, you want to try level 2. And that's what we call a reverse lunge, where you imagine where you take a knee and you come back. That's a little bit harder to do, but that's the same exercise as level 1, it's just a little bit harder. So you can go back and forth, or level 2, what we call a reverse lunge. Good for your quads, your hamstring, and glutes, or you can go walking back and forth. Perfect. From there, you go into your second set of the side to side. Level 1. Or we've done it here before, where it's level 2. That's a monster walk, where it's a bit of a squatted position, and then you go side to side. A little bit harder, works again those glute or hip muscles. That would be level 2. Or a more comfortable variation, standing tall. And then finally we go into our bending. So those feet will go planted, wide stance, hands on those hips. And you see if you can add a bend going back and forth. For this one, the legs stay straight. That would be level 1. If you are doing things around the house, need to pick up maybe plants or 5 to 10 pounds from the ground. Level 2 is bending at the knee. A knee bend makes it a little bit harder. And you can reach from the ground. That's level 2. Yeah. And then last one. Yeah. From there, you go back into that marching position. If you need to grab water, now's the time. We're going to get another 30 seconds to a minute break. So I'm going to mute all here. So then from there, we go into the third set of these exercises. So we were doing these stepping forward and stepping back. Option 1. Option 2, if you need a little bit harder variation, is your reverse lunge. You can always have a wall or a chair there for support. It's like taking a knee. Yeah. Holding on to something just in case, or to challenge the balance, arms to the side. But that's the same muscles, glutes, quads, hamstrings, so the thigh and hip, as stepping forward and back. You just choose the variation that's more comfortable for you. Yeah, you're good there. From there, you go back into that side to side. Level 1. Level 2 is your monster walk or crab walk. And level 3, a little bit harder variation, good for cyclists, is what we call a side lunge, where you move over to one side, you come up tall, and you move over to the other. That's level 3. That's the hardest variation. Feeling that stretch in your inner thighs. So it's sort of like having a seat and moving to one side. If there's any knee pain, stick with level 2 or level 1, going back to that side to side. Yeah. And then finally, we went on to that third one. So from there, those feet planted, stomach muscle pulled in, and just adding that bend back and forth. You can keep the legs straight, or you can add a little bit of a knee bend, and that will allow you to go closer to the ground. That's called a sumo deadlift or sumo bend. Good for hip flexibility, can help if you have stiffness in the low back, either straight leg or bent leg. Yeah. Good. Perfect. So from there, we're going to go into some stretches now. So we're going to do standing and or seated. You choose what's best for you. So if we're doing standing, you're going to try a runner's stretch. Front leg bent, back leg straight. My back heel can be a little bit elevated from the floor if you want to feel that more in the front of the hip, or it can be touching the floor if you want to stretch more of your calf muscle. So that's the runner stretch. Can be done standing or using your chair. It's this position. So you can try whichever one you like, either standing or in the seated position. Feeling that from the top of the hip down to the knee. We just do 15-20 seconds, so you're going to switch sides now. Other foot, or if you're standing, then you go on to your other side. Front leg bent, back leg straight. Can be done standing or seated. A runner's stretch. Or for people who sit down a lot in the day, they have tightness more in that front of the hip. With muscles, if we use the same muscles all day, every day, some muscles get tighter than others, and that can cause some imbalances. So what we do is we just try to do a full body routine. And if you could repeat some form of exercise most days of the week, then that will help you get through these times. Perfect. The second exercise we do, again, different options. Option 1, standing. Option 2, seated. Next one is a glute or hip stretch. So the seated version is seeing if you can just cross a leg. That bottom leg is straight, our leg crossed. Level 2 in the seated version, feeling that on the side of the hip. Or some people like to do exercises standing. So the standing version, you have a chair for support, is just crossing a leg over and having a seat. And you'll feel a more intense stretch at the glute. That would be the standing version. Glute stretch or hip stretch. A little bit harder to balance, sometimes can be a little bit more uncomfortable on the knee, so you would stick with the seated version instead. Then you come up tall, and you're gonna switch sides. So if you are seated position, you cross a leg in a tall posture, sitting on the edge of the chair, feeling your hip or glute stretch. Or if you're in a standing position, crossing that leg and having that seat. Yeah, we hold each stretch 15-20 seconds. and then you release. And finally, the third exercise we go into, standing or seated, up to you. I show seated first, is for your rib muscles. This is called a side crunch or a side bend. So for this one, you put one arm up, and with the other arm, stomach pulled in, you want to reach down and then come up again. Breathing in when you lower, breathing out when you come up, feeling a stretch in the side of the ribs and the low back as you reach, and then tightness every time you come back up again. That's a side crunch or side bend. If you're in the standing position, most people go reaching and back down again. Standing version or seated version. So then you try your other side. So standing, reaching down, reaching for the knee, stomach muscles pulled in. Or seated version, reaching down and up. This side bend or side crunch is good to move or strengthen your core muscles or your stomach. It stretches out the low back, so it can help if there is stiffness on one side. And then we repeat these exercises for your last set. So those arms come down. You see if you can go into your second set of that runner stretch. Tall position. Digging your toes into the ground. Feeling the stretch from the top of the hip down to the knee. Or your standing version. Front leg bent, back leg straight. We try 15-20 seconds each side. And then you switch sides. So if you're standing, looking the other way, front leg bent, back leg straight. Or your seated version. So for anyone with any type of heart condition, warming up makes it easier for you to get into an exercise. So you could use these exercises for a warm-up, 5 to 15 minutes. And if you find these exercises to be very comfortable or very easy, you could treat it as a cool down as well, especially if you are cycling or you are taking longer walks. Typically, stretching is a good way of cooling down. But if all of this routine is very easy for you, you could treat that as a cool down too. Anything that lowers your heart rate. Then we go into your glute or hip stretch, where you cross a leg in the seated position. That makes it more of a stretch, bending that knee. Or if you like doing standing versions of exercises, then crossing a leg and having that seat. A more intense stretch on the side where your leg is bent. You switch sides. So you're going to cross the other leg. Or your seated version. That leg comes on down. And then we do the last one, which is your side bend or side crunch. If you're in that seated position, reaching down and coming back up again, those stomach muscles pulled in. And that can be useful if you're trying to reach for something from the chair. Or some people like doing standing exercises. So for them, reaching down and coming up. can stretch lower back, and as long as you pull the stomach muscles in, you'll feel tightness in the ribs or oblique muscles. And then you switch sides. So if you're standing like a teapot, if you are in a seated position, you could reach down and come back up again. Either variation trains stomach and can stretch the side of the low back. Yeah, so these videos are posted onto YouTube after, so if you didn't have a chance to see it here, they are posted on the channel. But that's the class for today. So I will unmute everyone and I'll take any comments, suggestions, anything you want to see extra. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll be here for a little bit.